Good. Um, Good evening, everybody. Um, Welcome to the May month lecture series, organized, co-hosted by Boston Study Group. Uh, this is, as I was saying, this is going to be the spring semester end, warm and calm ending. This is actually the week when students are graduating across major US universities, and so outside we have that fun, but also there is rain and cold, climate change expectations as we are going through. Um I'm very delighted and honored, and actually very excited to uh, invite Dr. Mosarab H. Khan. Um, Thank you, Sanjeev, for really making sure Dr. Khan uh, comes to Boston and delivers this very important uh, interventions on the issues of caste among Indian Muslims, but also the eminent threats in India that we are facing. The questions of lynching and lynching as it goes, it is with especially in American history has its own racial historical past, and that actually fundamentally becomes the foundation of some of the coordinates of civil rights, anti-imperial movements, and lynching as a metaphor as well as an act is used by the fascist forces to tremble down and to create a sort of a threat that is imminent, that is perpetual, and that is long lasting, and that is done by the very demonstration of hanging of bodies and flogging of uh, uh, the bodies, male and female, in a certain way, or burning down. So lynching has a very crass and dehumanizing element to it. Lynching could be found and explored in instances of loss of human sensibilities, effects of genocide, gives us understandings of how lynching contributes to some of our thinking. But more importantly, as I look at lynching, lynching disturbs the morphed order. What we live is currently it's a morphed order. We think it is an order, but it is very much a morphed version. It is actually putting a slab of ice underneath a volcano to show that it is cold, but it is at some point going to melt. A lynching act actually does tell us that this is a morphed order. It is not something that you do. And unfortunately, the instances of lynching, as we see within the photographic black and white images of in America, in American past, currently in India, we are actually witnessing it manifold, from south to north, east to west, and from center across. Um, the instances that we come to know get reported in the media, but the unreported incidents that many of us, actually, I am on a few email groups that tracks the Dalit and tribal uh, atrocities, and I get this daily digest and weekly digest, and also I am part of a group where the journalists share their stories that they can't share with their press clubs or their media enterprises because of certain issues. So I got this message of it's a high dimensional photograph about a few years ago of a body that was looking like a body, cloth draped around. And as I looked through the 10 photographs, I had a emotional breakdown. That and then the story followed that the woman was a Dalit woman working in a village, and she was going claim for some of her. Uh, I guess she was fighting against the landlords for some reason of taking of her land. And on her way back, when she went to police station, one woman, broad daylight, brave enough, defies all this patriarchal and casteist order, goes to the place. On her return, a truck is run over her. She's brutally killed, but a truck kind of goes on her brain, and her brain is outside. Um, and when I saw that, the sari on the body of that woman just made me feel as to how the idea of covering woman's body, but the body is dead. And the sari brought me memories of my mothers and sisters who actually live by this very on the thin borderline of respect and death. Uh, so in that sense, when we look at the issues of lynching in contemporary India, the predominant population that gets overwhelmingly lynched is the Muslim group, especially under the light of right-wing Hindutva fascism, where uh, organic forms of hybridities are produced by these fascist forces, and one of them, for example, beef, becomes an issue that needs to be tackled. And we have seen this with unaccountable incidents since Modi government came to power. Not that it did not exist before Modi government, it did existed, but right now we are seeing amplifying of those narratives. And then we have something what we call the issues of engaging with personal. Lynching as a demonstration of a public act, going into the private and personal laws, and in this case, the triple talaq, has become a contentious issue. You open a newspaper, op-ed pages are run by all these elite academics as well as policymakers sitting in New Delhi, writing and giving their opinions. Some Muslim liberals, some claiming Muslim conservatism, some claiming Indian liberalism, all sorts of in various colors we see to read. But we get, I think, a very scant picture of what actually this is. And in this case, we also see how caste functions. So we are very grateful to have this dialogue at Harvard University. That will help us to also, we had a dialogue a few weeks or months ago here at Harvard on triple talaq. And again, some of the debates that we were expecting couldn't fall down. So Dr. Musharraf Khan just graduated with his PhD from New York University. He actually came to get his degree. He walked, and congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
We are very honored and we are very happy, and we wish you very best for your future endeavors. He had taught at a college called Kurseong College in Darjeeling at the University of North Bengal for 5 years, from 2002 to 2007. Teaching is quite an interesting profession in India because you really dedicate yourself to the teaching as a vocation, as a knowledge. He's largely interested in the South Asian literature and culture. His PhD is from in English, and he's a founding editor of Cafe Dissensus. I mean, Dissensus actually is beyond dissent. It's like continuous dissents. And that is a magazine when Sanjeev introduced me to. I was very fascinated to go through some of the contents that they have, very rich. I will encourage you all to look up Cafe Dissensus, which he's curating and editing. He's currently editing a book, and we look forward to it, which is entitled Muslim Life in West Bengal. And this is, as it claims to be the first book of its kind to explore post-independent Muslim life in West Bengal. This is a very important aspect. I haven't had any important interlocutors who could give me anything beyond Sachar Commission.
Right.
And so we don't know what's happening.
Right.
And so within this directories of knowing and knowing, Musharraf, we welcome you for the talk, and we look forward to learning more from you.
Thank you so much. I think I can start now. Yeah, thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank Boston Study Group. It's been a pleasure and a privilege for me to be here. And whatever I know of the group, that you're working to destabilize certain traditional centers of power. I mean, if we could say upper caste, I would love to say that, of course. Upper class, which is often conflated in the Indian case. We need, I think, if we want to create a just and equitable society, which I'm sure we all are kind of committed to, especially those who are from the marginal groups in India, then I think we need to create our own spaces, more and more spaces, and BSG is one of those spaces. And I'm very happy to be here, to come here and having an opportunity to speak. Also, I'm fascinated with the group because I feel for any kind of I wouldn't say revolutionary, I would say counter movement An intellectual foundation is very important to think, to critique, to write, which I'm afraid in India doesn't happen often. It's more activism based. Activism there means, you know, a sort of complete divestment from intellectual work. And I feel it's important that BSG is actually building that kind of intellectual foundation on which we could launch our activism, work, action, whatever you call it. The thinking is very important. We can't divest it. And my sincere gratitude to Dr. Suraj Yengre for having me here, for this kind invitation, and for allowing me this platform. And I'm really grateful. I would like to share some of my thoughts on caste vis-a-vis Muslim, the things, contemporary events happening in India regarding Muslims. And Dr. Yengre has already spoken about cafe dissensus, but still I thought I'll just speak a couple of lines. It's my chance to advertise. It's an online journal. We call it alternative. It may not be alternative, but at least we try to offer certain counter views to the dominant discourse that we find in mainstream media. Because honestly speaking, when we started also, we thought that the kind of things we want to write, no one wants to publish. It's as simple as that sometimes. The space was much more constricted. Now a little bit more open, the online space and all. So we had to create spaces 5 years back. So I would request all of you to check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, and also to write for us. Please do write. I request all members of BSG and Ambedkarites to contribute, right? Kind of produce discourses which are counter discourses to the mainstream discourses. Having said that, I think now I'm going to start with my talk. I'm going to focus on two contemporary events regarding Indian Muslims. One, as Dr. Yengre has said, is the lynching of Muslims, which started more or less, you can say, after the Modi government came to power in 2014. We had a couple of cases in 2014, but then it assumed, you can say, a kind of severe proportion by the end of 2015, by September. Thereafter, there were quite a few lynching of Muslims. So I'm looking at lynching of Muslims, and also I'm looking at something that is happening within the community, Muslim community. That is, for a while it has been happening. It's nothing new. That is this whole process of divorcing by uttering thrice the words talaq, talaq, talaq. In Islam, there's this idea of talaq biddat, in which you can actually divorce someone by uttering the words thrice. It has been this practice has been discontinued in many other countries, but in India we are still continuing with this. So there is a debate, and recently it went to court. I'll come to all that. So what my contention in this lecture is that these two debates have been seen predominantly as issues, as Hindu-Muslim issues, lynching as predominantly a result of Hindu-Muslim conflict and nothing else but that. Whereas triple talaq is nothing but an you can say, sort of intra-community thing, within the Muslim community. What I am trying to say is, in both of the incidents, in the discourses, the question of caste has been completely elided. No one talks of that. These are also issues of caste to an extent. And what I'm trying to do in this lecture is to sort of demonstrate how the question of caste, which is elided, haunts the landscape of Muslim life in India at this very moment, in these incidents, but no one really talks about them. How do we situate or resituate the discourse of caste as a central problematic of lynching and triple talaq is something I am interested in doing. Most of the things I'll be saying would appear familiar to people who are from South Asia, who follow news closely, because most of them are drawn from the things that are happening at the moment, because this is something pretty recent. So I've drawn mostly from newspapers. But bear with me, in case you're feeling a little bored. I'll be repeating stuff that you might know already. So I thought I'll start with the case of lynching of Muslims in India. And what I'll do, I'll first talk about lynching, especially the sociology of lynching and how it's happening at this very moment in India. Then I'll talk about triple talaq, what are the issues, what are the discourses. And then I'll come to the question of caste. How does caste actually figure in the question of lynching? How does caste figure in the question of triple talaq? And finally, I'll say why I call it haunting or spectre and not exactly a question of caste. Because why caste is not a concrete reality, it kind of haunts and just leaves. Let's get on with this. The first major case of lynching was reported in September 2015 when Muhammad Talaq, a man in UP, when his neighbors barged into his house and killed him. They bludgeoned him to death, along with his son, who was severely injured, his son Danish, on the accusation that he was eating beef, cow meat, and also he was storing in his fridge for future consumption. It was right after Eid, and as we know, in Eid in India, most Muslims do slaughter cows or buffalo or whatever. So on that suspicion. By the way, this death was not the first of its kind. There were deaths even in 2014, couple of them, which was not that high, highlighted all that much. And after BJP-led NDA came to power under Narendra Modi, we have seen there have been a spate of killings of Muslims and Dalits in India on the pretext of protecting cows. In May 2015, there was another incident in Rajasthan in a place called Birloka, where Abdul Ghaffar Qureshi, who was a trader in meat, he was thrashed to death for trading in meat. In March 2016, Muhammad Mazloom Ansari, 35, and his 15-year-old son were actually killed and hanged in Jharkhand. I mean, this is a classic case of African, not just lynching, but hanging as well, creating this spectacle of death. And their bodies bore marks of torture. In July 2016, 4 Dalit men, many of us might know it, were actually stripped, chained, and beaten in Gujarat's Gir Somnath district. The victims were said they were actually skinning already dead cows. They were not killing cows. They were already dead. And I know after that, Jignesh Mavani's movement and the whole movement started, which had kind of died down after Rohit Vemula's death after some time. But again, it sort of sparked, this incident sparked. In 2017, Pehlo Khan, a dairy farmer from Haryana, he had gone to Rajasthan to buy cows and bring them back, milch cows. They were not for slaughtering at all. And he, along with his accomplices, were thrashed. He died, 2 of them survived. They came back to Haryana. In June 2017, a 19-year-old boy, Junaid Khan, was stabbed in a train in Haryana. He was returning from Delhi after shopping for Eid. He was going back to his village, and he was he was stabbed. And the newspapers reported that he and his brother, who were traveling together, were tortured by their fellow passengers and even accused of eating beef. Why they were being stabbed? Because they eat beef. In November 2017, Umar Muhammad was shot dead in Mewat in Haryana because he was transporting cows. There are so many, I have just picked 5 or 6. There have been at least 26 deaths of Muslims so far, lynching deaths. So I have highlighted only a few of them to highlight, to show the incidents of lynching, harassment, torture that have been unleashed after Modi came to power, Mr. Modi came to power in 2014. Let me give you some data just to kind of show the enormity, just that because I have been doing a kind of narrative so far, let's get on with the data to an extent. Many of us might follow this website called India Spend, which is data-driven journalism. In fact, the man who was managing it was in Harvard. Now he's gone back and he's doing it. What's his name? I forget. Sorry. India Spend. He was here. And I quote from their they did a report on lynching from 2010 to 2017. And this is what I quote from their report. Our team gathered information about cow-related violence from 2010 onwards and found no cases reported during 2010 and 2011. There were no cases. From 2012 until today, 78 cow-related hate crimes have been reported across the country. Most of these, that's 97% of all these incidents, have occurred over the last 3 years after Prime Minister Narendra Modi assumed power in May 2014. That is 97% of all cases happened after Modi came to power. Only one incident each was reported in 2012 and 2013. In the 6 years since 2012, most of those killed, that is 25 people were killed. In fact, there was another killing, so it will be 26, the last reported. Of those killed, 25 of 29 persons were Muslim. You can imagine, 25 of 29 were actually Muslims, those were killed. Of all victims killed or injured whose identity was reported in news reports, 53% were Muslim, 12% were Dalit, and 10% were Hindus. And for 22%, their religious identity of those victims were not known. Anyway, so it was all done, unquote, it was all done to protect cows. And as the newspapers reported, we see that most of these are committed by cow vigilantes who have some kind of affiliation with right-wing groups in India indirectly, but many a time even direct protection given by the right-wing government in India. So it's like a government which is actually sort of supervising this whole act of killing, lynching of Muslims in India. As the beef lynching unfolded, the Prime Minister he maintained a profound silence. He never spoke anything. Even when he spoke very tangentially, in a vague manner, he would say Mahatma Gandhi wouldn't have approved of killing in the name of cow protection. That's the kind of logic he offered. He never directly condemned, even after the first incident, Muhammad Ashraf's incident happened, talaq incident happened, which is the most gruesome to start with. So the results of this has been, because there is protection for these vigilante groups, the result has been that the harassment has continued for these families. In many cases, the victims have been actually implicated. In some cases, those who killed, those who lynched, they have been out of jail, as in the case of Vishal Rana, who is an accused in the killing of talaq. He got bail. He's a BJP worker's son in UP. He was given bail by Allahabad High Court, and along with other 14 people who were also given bail in that same case. And in fact, in October 2017, many of those who got bail, they got job through a BJP corporate or councillor in NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation. So their bail, being in jail, didn't go against them when it came to jobs, contractual jobs in NTPC. Similarly, in Pehlu Khan's murder case, police registered recently cases of smuggling against those who survived, those two other people who were with Pehlu Khan. Whereas the people who actually killed are exonerated. They have not been arrested yet. And Human Rights Watch recently observed, I quote from their report, instead of taking prompt legal action against the vigilantes, many linked to extremist Hindu groups affiliated with the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, the police too often have filed complaints against the assault victims, their relatives and associates under the laws banning cow slaughter. So it has been, the justice has been quite perverse, to say the least, reverse and perverse at the same time. So this is just to, this first part, I wanted to just very briefly give you the sociology of lynching, what's exactly happening at the moment in terms of statistics, in terms of certain incidents, and why it's happening in the name of cow protection. Next, I come to the question of triple talaq. Now, it's a question of Muslim women within the community. In the first incident, it's a question of the place of Muslims in the larger nation, as the other, as a polluting influence, cow as meat as polluting influence, which need to be purged. In the second case, it's far more, you can say, subtle, where the question of Muslim women's position within the community is in question. And it's nothing new. Again, it has been going on for quite some time. This question of triple talaq. Because most Muslim women do feel vulnerable when men have so much power to give them divorce just by uttering those three words. Whereas Muslim marriage is always thought to be a contract where both the parties would have to be consulted before any divorce is actually solemnized. But this is not the case. But unlike in the case of beef lynching, interestingly, when it comes to the case of triple talaq among Muslim women, the BJP government, the right-wing government, has been very proactive. It's not silent anymore. What it has done, it has introduced a bill in the parliament. It has tried to push through the bill to give protection to Muslim women, to save, quote unquote, save Muslim women from the clutches of violent Muslim men to an extent. Before I come to that, let's talk a little about what exactly happened in the case of triple talaq in India. What's the discourse at the moment? In August 2017, that is last year, a 5-judge bench representing judges from all religions, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Islam, Christianity, Hindu, 5 judges from representing different religions, they passed a judgment by a 3-2 majority in which they said that uttering triple talaq at one go is actually void. It's not valid anymore. Because according to Islamic law, you have to give at least 90 days time. Every month, once one could utter the word talaq and wait for reconciliation. If the reconciliation doesn't happen, then after 1 month, the second time one could utter. If again there are efforts of reconciliation by relatives, by themselves, if it doesn't happen, then the third time, after 90 days, one can utter, and that will be binding and final. But there's nothing like you could just say one fine day, what talaq, 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 and that too not just saying. Sometimes they were sending SMS to the woman, wife, talaq, 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 WhatsApp messages, through Skype. It's like crazy. So that the judges said that it stands invalid. No Muslim man can do it anymore. And I read a little bit of judgment from the court judgment, what they said exactly. I quote. Triple talaq may be a permissible practice, but it is retrograde and unworthy. Since triple talaq is instant, it is irrevocable, and the marital tie gets broken. It's violative of Article 14 of Indian Constitution, that is the right to equality. Further, one of the judges, unquote, another judge, Justice Kurian Joseph, said, I quote, there are 4 sources of Islamic law. In India, as we know, there are 4 sources of Islamic law, and most Muslims in India follow the Hanafi school of law, jurisprudence, fiqh, we call it. In that, triple talaq is supposed to be valid. It comes from Hanafi school of Islamic law. Only the Quran is the first source of law. Therefore, sources other than the Quran are a supplement to what is in it. Therefore, there can be nothing more than what is written in the Quran. Quran attributes permanence to matrimony. Essential steps are required before talaq. Triple talaq is against the tenets of the Quran, therefore violates Shariat, unquote. And the court, once it pronounced the judgment, it asked the parliament, the government, to promulgate a law within 6 months, to come up with a law banning triple talaq. If the government cannot come up with a law, cannot push through the law, the court's verdict would stand. Okay, so, but before, how did the court come to this, this kind of a peculiar situation where the court has to legislate what should be legislated? The court had to do that job of, passing a judgment, banning something like this kind of practice. There are many Muslim women who have been actually victims of this for years now, who have suffered because of this. There are 5 women who actually petitioned the High Court, the Supreme Court. They have been petitioning for last 2 years. Since 2016, they have been petitioning. The first is Sharaya Banu. She is from Uttar Pradesh. She petitioned the Supreme Court for a ban on triple talaq, polygamy, and nikah halala. Nikah halala, I'm not sure if I should explain. It's the practice of, if one pronounces triple talaq, one can still get back to the former husband. Triple talaq is supposed to be divorce. By marrying someone else, cohabiting with that person, and they have to have, consummated their marriage. And then that person would have to divorce that woman so that she can come back and marry her first husband. This is nikah halala, which women find degrading, of course. So they're trying also to ban this practice of nikah halala. So 36-year-old Banu's husband, Rizwan Ahmed, is a property dealer in Allahabad. He pronounced triple talaq in October 2015 and took away her 2 kids. And it's alleged that she was forced to undergo 6 abortions, apart from physical and mental torture and stuff like that. Her husband opposed her plea by saying that triple talaq was a matter of personal law, so it can't be interfered by the government, by the judges, by the courts. Along with her, there were 5 other petitioners, in fact. The Ishrat Jahan from Bengal, West Bengal, from Howrah, whose husband gave her triple talaq over phone from Dubai after 15 years of marriage. Just from Dubai, he said talaq, talaq, talaq. There's Gulshan Parveen from Rampur, UP, who received a talaq nama, that is a document where it's written, on a 10 rupee stamp paper when she was visiting her parents in 2015. Suddenly, she found herself homeless along with a 2-year-old son. Because she went there, her husband sent a talaq nama that you are divorced now. Afreen Rahman was married in 2014. And in fact, I was listening to her interview. She was married after she met her husband on an online matrimonial portal, which of course means that they're not uneducated people. These are the kind of ideas we have in our mind. These are very sophisticated people. They know science, technology, everything. And she claimed to have been beaten for dowry and forced to leave her in-laws' place in 2015. Once in her parents' home, her husband sent her a letter via speed post saying triple talaq. Married in 2012, Atiya Sabri was given a triple talaq on a piece of paper. She approached the court seeking maintenance for herself and her 2 daughters, who were aged 3 and 4. Apart from these 5 women, there's also this Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan, BBMA, a progressive Muslim women's organization in Bombay. And they have been working for long to eradicate this practice among Muslim women. They've been working with Muslim women for long. They filed a petition in Supreme Court as well, which is, this is online available, that whole document. It's called Muslim Women's Quest for Equality, arguing that the Quran advocates equality between men and women. And one of the founders, Zakia Soman, said, I quote, "We have reproduced verses from the Quran about talaq, negotiations, and how it should happen over a minimum period of 90 days, as I said, over 3 months. The second argument is about gender justice. There is no ambiguity in the Constitution of India about all citizens having equal rights," unquote. And a recent study has found that 79% of those women who have been divorced through triple talaq, they have never received any maintenance from their husbands. So that's one of the reasons why patriarchy wants it to continue, so that they can get away by not paying maintenance. Because if you go to a court of law, you have to pay maintenance. That's a whole thing. So following the Supreme Court judgment banning triple talaq on 28th December 2017, that is to the end of last year, the government of India passed the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Act in the lower house of the parliament in Lok Sabha with a voice vote. Because the BJP has a majority, they could pass it with a voice vote in the lower house. But it was objected to by other political parties in India, like Congress, Samajwadi Party, RJD, there are many other parties. And then it was taken to the upper house, Rajya Sabha, for the bill to be passed there. Because without majority in both the houses, you can't actually promulgate a law in India. And in the upper house, it was objected to by all these parties, because BJP doesn't have a majority in the upper house. And the bill never passed. It is finally referred to one standing committee. So it's kind of put in the cold storage for the timing. So no one knows when actually anything is going to happen. So now the question is, why was there so much of objection regarding this bill in the parliament? Because apart from BJP, all other parties are objecting to it. There are 3-4 reasons behind it. One is they see the provision for jail, like the bill says that the husband could be jailed for 3 years if he pronounces triple talaq. 3 years. So it's like criminalizing marriage, which is essentially a civil, you can say, offense. It's not a criminal offense, right? So it is further criminalizing Muslim men who are already in a disproportionate number in Indian jails. So some Muslims say that it's another way of implicating Muslim men and putting them in jail in the pretext of triple talaq. There's one objection. Second objection you have is, many say that if triple talaq is not even, valid, if the court is saying it's invalid, then the marriage still stands, right? So where is the question then of how would the man then maintain his family, wife, if he goes to jail? Because the wife is not divorced yet. If triple talaq has declared, if the court has declared triple talaq invalid, technically the marriage is still on. The marriage is not off yet. Then how could the man provide maintenance if he's spending 3 years in jail? Who would provide for the family? Third, many say it's another way of right-wing government's effort through backdoor to introduce uniform civil code, do away with personal laws in India. This is just the first step. In fact, today only I read, I think yesterday or today, that in fact BJP is now planning to introduce a bill, consultation paper or something for uniform civil code. So they're saying this is just one way of doing away with personal laws so that uniform civil code could be introduced in India. I think at this point, it's important to remember another important case of triple talaq in late 1980s, the Shah Banu case, we call it, which kind of, you can say, changed India's political landscape fundamentally forever. What exactly, those of us who are not aware of that case, what happened is Shah Banu was a victim of triple talaq. She went to Supreme Court, and because her husband didn't give her any maintenance, Supreme Court upheld the case and said maintenance must be paid to the wife. But the conservative Maulanas and Mullahs and others within the community objected to this, and they said, no, maintenance cannot be paid for more than 90 days. That is the period which it takes to get divorce, triple talaq, if it is done legally. Beyond that, no maintenance would be paid to women. And Rajiv Gandhi government at the time, they overturned the court verdict and passed a bill in the parliament, because they had a majority, in which it upheld the view of the conservative organizations and members of Muslim community. And what happened, that kind of gave, you can say, impetus to right-wing politics, which was already there. And the right wing, like BJP and others, took it as appeasement of Muslim community, and thereafter we know what happened from late 80s on until Babi Masjid demolition and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting to keep in mind that the BJP government's effort this time has been the exactly opposite of what the Congress had done before, because BJP has nothing to lose by introducing this particular bill, and Congress had everything to lose then by negating, that. But interestingly, even at this time, the Congress didn't allow it to be passed in the upper house, and it has gone to cold storage again. So there is a typical vote bank politics in India. You're always trying to keep some number of these marginal communities happy somehow by playing into their hands. But what I'm trying to say here is, I'll come to my next point. This is just to introduce you to these ideas of what's happening at the moment in India. What I'm saying is beef lynching and triple talaq, they both illustrate, on the one hand, the place of Muslims within the nation, on the other hand, the place of Muslim women within the community itself. But what is the link between these two events that in presentized Muslim face in India? Both these incidents actually they represent questions of power, hegemony, oppression, maintaining the boundaries of purity of the nation and of the community itself. If beef lynching is about maintaining the purity of the nation by othering Muslims, then triple talaq is about maintaining the purity of Muslim community itself. Something, on women's, you can say bodies, and women's, by negating women's rights, we recreate this whole idea of community boundary in a sense. But more than that, these two cases show for me is questions of caste, which are mostly elided, which I'm coming next. That how we have seen these two cases so far as one of Hindu-Muslim conflict or as an internal issue of the Muslim community, but never as a question of caste. And that's where I want to make my intervention. But I must say that it's purely conceptual at the moment. I'm not doing so much of data analysis and stuff like that. I'm suggesting some ways of thinking about caste through these two incidents. These two events have been mostly interpreted through the lens of communalism and community matters. The lynching is seen as a kind of bullying tactic to force the minority Muslims to submit to the majoritarian control and imagination of the Hindu nation, in which cow protection is the duty of every devout Hindu, to recreate the Ram Rajya of Mahatma Gandhi. And also in the directive principles of Indian Constitution, Article 48, you have that cow slaughter would have slowly, it's our duty to stop cow slaughter in India. It is there, but it's not enforceable because it's in directive principle. But how have some of the writers reacted to the issue of, have they taken, reacted to the issue of beef lynching? Have they factored in caste in their comments? Because there are so many writers, most of them are upper caste writers anyways. Those who write, as you said, op-ed pieces, they're upper caste, upper class in India. How have they written, how have they tried to understand this question of beef lynching, especially the liberal? I'm here quoting the liberal ones, not the conservative ones, of course. Because we take issue with mostly the left liberal ones, right? Because we feel should be the ones who should be sympathetic to these things. Manas Firak Bhattacharya, I'm not sure if he's a poet basically, but he's a commentator as well. He wrote, I would say, a very evocative piece. I mean, a left liberal evocative piece on beef lynching when it happened. And I just quote a bit from his essay, which was published in The Wire. It's called "Lynching is a Modern Form of Tribalism." He wrote, "The denial of personhood is a key element to lynching. The body of the victim is denied any moral essence, deprived of rights, easily reduced to the body of a vulnerable animal. The denial of moral agency to the untouchable prevents Hindus from developing a sense of public or social conscience. This is why crimes like lynching are carried out with an easy absence of guilt. They are done in a spirit, to use Ambedkar's words, quote, as though such lawlessness is lawful," unquote. The new untouchables of this lynching nationalism are the Muslims, and also those whose lives and ideas contradict and resist the Hindu nationalist project, unquote. So what we see here basically is Bhattacharya comes close to mark such lynching as a new form of untouchability. The whole idea of lynching Muslims is a new form of untouchability. But he turns the victims into a sort of metaphor for the unwanted in the body politic of the nation. instead of saying that most of these victims are actually untouchables in the sense of belonging to the Dalit and backward Muslim communities. It's not that the whole community has become suddenly untouchable through the lynching. That most of these victims are actually untouchables, literally, because they are Dalit Muslims, they are backward Muslims. They're not upper caste elite Muslims. Just to quote another well-known journalist and commentator who wrote this piece in Atlantic, published from the US. She writes, I quote her, "Lynching is an old crime here, often committed against those of so-called lower caste and marginalized tribes in order to reinforce brutal social hierarchies. But dozens of news reports over the last 2 years indicate a dramatic rise in a specific kind of mob murder, the so-called beef lynchings of Muslims," unquote. Again, while perceptibly commenting on how lynching has been deployed as a powerful spectacle against lower caste and marginal people, Naya still makes a distinction between such lynchings and the particular case of lynching of Muslims related to beef, thereby reiterating the idea that such lynching is basically a Hindu-Muslim issue or a manifestation of communal conflict. What gets elided in this question, in this equation, is how caste is the central problematic in the lynching of Muslims. Why I say that, why caste is the central problematic, which is not being talked about at all when it comes to lynching. First, when the majoritarian nation tries to kill Muslims, via all these proxy right-wing organizations for cattle trade, or it tries to ban cattle slaughter and trading in beef, it's merely consolidating upper caste power by means of excluding polluting influences, the hallmark of the caste system in India. So by excluding these people from the body politic to an extent, it's simply marking its own boundary of caste, upper caste body politic, the nation as an upper caste, entity. Second, we must note that most of the people who are engaged in cattle trade and slaughtering business are actually lower caste Muslims, which is often not talked about. I have not heard many writing in op-ed pieces on this. Engaged in traditional caste occupations, such as Kasais and other occupational groups. In fact, in a Hindustan Times report on a leather complex in Bengal, the reporter stated that those employed at the units were mostly backward Muslims and Dalits in that unit. It was not like upper caste, Ashraf Muslims, elite Muslims who were actually working in these units. The large-scale layoff in these factories after the BJP government came to power and promulgated a cow slaughter ban and also a ban on cattle trade makes lives of these communities miserable. This fact is most elided from the discourse of Muslim lynching, even in the rhetoric of so-called Muslim leaders such as Asaduddin Waisi and the left liberals, who see it mostly as a communal problem, one of Hindu imposition on Muslims. Instead, what I am contending is that the lynching of Muslims in India is primarily a problem of caste. The people engaged in cattle trade, slaughtering cows, beef trade, poor migrant laborers in other states are mostly lower caste Muslims. To ignore this reality, even factually proven, this is not even conceptual, this is factually proven. To ignore this reality is to ignore the logic of lynching itself, which is one of maintaining the purity of the Hindu nation for upper caste Hindus. Sorry. I stopped because I was going to make a point which maybe might miss. That's why I thought I'll stop. Yeah, sorry. So the people engaged in these, are mostly lower caste Muslims, as I said. So to ignore this reality is to ignore the logic of lynching, which is one of maintaining the purity of the Hindu nation, of upper caste Hindus, and maintaining elite Ashraf Muslim hegemony, on the other hand. By collapsing caste into the larger rhetoric of Muslim unity, what the elite Ashraf Muslims do mostly, they talk of Muslim unity. Because the moment you talk about caste, it's like fracturing that whole idea of it. The same thing, Arya Samaj was doing by doing Shuddhi movement, bringing into the fold all these, never fracturing the community as such. So for me, primarily, lynching is a problematic of caste, nothing else but that. Such elision of caste from the discourse of lynching is what Ejaz Ali, who founded the All India Backward Muslim Morcha in 1994, calls the deliberate omission of both upper caste Hindu and elite Ashraf Muslims who ignore the basic problems of the community. Let me quote him a bit here, that how these two communities, these two, segments of Muslims and Hindus, often they're hand in glove, basically, because their interest is primarily to keep their hegemony on. So I quote what he said, Ejaz Ali, but unfortunately, I'll come to that later, that both these rebel figures, they turn into somewhat, they're co-opted often by political parties. And what you see in 1994, you don't see it in 2018 anymore. They became MLAs, in RJD and other parties, and the rhetoric died down gradually. This fire was no longer there in them. So what he said is, I quote, "The way the traditional Muslim leaders reacted to the Babri Masjid issue made me think that there was an urgent need for the Dalit Muslims to come up with their own leaders, championing bread and butter concerns, rather than emotional and symbolic issues. I do not say that the Babri issue is not important, but I do insist that it was not the primary issue for us means Dalit Muslims. Our concern should be about jobs and education for our people. And it is only after tackling these that the other secondary issues can be taken up. All along, however, the traditional Muslim leadership has been championing merely symbolic issues, be it the case of Urdu, the minority character of Aligarh Muslim University, Muslim personal law, or Babri Masjid. What we are calling for is a new leadership that has a new sense of priorities of the community, which for the Dalit Muslims are primarily the real, these worldly issues of sheer physical survival. These are the words, So I'm trying to connect how, if we keep this in mind, the question of bread and butter for lower caste Muslims, then they're the hardest hit when something like beef lynching actually happens. These are lower caste Muslims. But in a converse way also, it's a way of saying that beef lynching is not just a Muslim issue. It's a Dalit and backward Muslim issue, in a way, to look at it. Iqbal Ahmed Sharif, who is another leader, lower caste leader, the Muslim leader, reiterates the same view when he says that the Muslim leadership in India has been mostly dominated by the Ashraf elite, who are least concerned about the basic issues of the community, and instead they want to impose their hegemony on lower caste and backward Muslims. I'm not quoting what he says here. I mean, more or less the same thing what Ejaz Ali says, the same kind of thing. And also in another book, which became very famous, Ali Anwar's book, Masawat Ki Jang, Battle for Equality, which was published in 2001, Irfan Ahmed also provides a similar example from All India Muslim OBC organization, not Dalit. I was talking about the Dalit Muslim organization. There's another called All India OBC Muslim organization. When this particular organization organized a conference in Delhi under the leadership of its convener, Shabir Ansari, in 1996, he was accused of dividing the Muslim community. Because all these are also, we have to keep in mind, contextualize it post-Mandal phase, when already caste was OBC and other castes were being talked about. So Muslims were also demanding their fair share in that. In fact, following that conference, Dawat, the Urdu bi-weekly organ of Jamaat-e-Islami Hind, published a story on its front page with the title, "Do not create further disunity in problem-ridden millat," within the community. Do not create any disunity, because question of caste is simply going to divide us. As Ahmad writes, the Ashraf Muslims display two distinct responses whenever questions of caste comes up among Muslims. Either they say it does not exist, or they would say that it comes from Hindu religion, which is not the case. I'll come to it. That Islam sort of, these are accretions from Hindu religion. Islam didn't have any caste system. That's what they say. Or they simply say that these people are trying to divide the community. So these are the stock responses of upper caste leaders when it comes to questions of caste. What these organizations for marginal Muslim communities resist is a particular kind of Ashraf hegemony. By that I mean this All India backward OBC Muslim or Dalit Muslim organizations. They try to resist the hegemony of upper caste Muslims, Ashraf Muslims, which has been legitimized by Ashraf scholars and ulama since the medieval times. I mean, I'll just give you one example, how Hindu religion to an extent actually is not responsible for caste issues among Muslims. There were medieval scholars like Ziauddin Barani, who was a court Turkish of Turkish origin, who was a courtier in the court of Muhammad bin Tughlaq in Delhi, 14th century. In his famous book, in fact, Fatwa-e-Jahandari, Barani makes a clear distinction between Ashraf high-born and Ajlaf low-born Muslims. And he strongly advocates that these low-born Muslims are not good enough to work for the government in court. So they should never be given any position of responsibility, like army chief, let's say, governor of a province. Because until then, it seems, in some cases, the local Indian Muslims who converted, they were occupying some of the positions. And some of these people like Ziauddin Barani and others, they started writing vehemently against it because they always identified with either Persia or Turkey and Afghanistan and all those other kind of places. And thereafter, the sultans during the Sultanate, in fact, they started sacking these Indian-born Muslims from these important positions. And they were all given to these upper caste Ashraf Muslims. Most of them had foreign origin in India. So what I try to show is briefly that beef lynching is actually a question of caste. It's a problematic of caste. And that caste question is nothing new among Muslims. It has been coming, since medieval times. You can see it's continuing. And only very recently, since 90s, there have been ruptures. There have been challenges to Ashraf elite hegemony among Muslims. Now I come to the question of triple talaq. How do we read triple talaq as a question of caste? And I found myself to be at a loss of words because there are no statistics, We can say conceptually that, okay, since most Muslims in India are not Ashraf Muslims, most Muslims are either Dalits or backward caste Muslims in India. So the women who must be getting divorced must be also from these communities. So it's a question of caste. But here I'm trying to, maybe it may sound a little convoluted, my argument in this case, but I'll see what we can come up with. How much time do I have now? 10 minutes? Yeah, that'll be enough. Yeah. Once the bill was actually introduced in the parliament, there have been many Muslim organizations which have been vehemently against this, like Jamiat Ulema Hind, General Secretary Maulana Mahmud Madani, whom you often see on television channels, and he's like one of those liberal voices, because they didn't support Pakistan. That's true. This particular Muslim organization, in fact, opposed Jinnah and Muslim League during partition. So they had this credential of being very nationalist. So he said, even after the court had actually declared it void, he said, if you want to punish the person for committing triple talaq, you can do it. But the divorce will still be recognized by us. So we don't, that in a way, it's like contempt of court. We don't actually believe, we don't trust this judgment by the court. Not only do we not agree with the judgment, we think this is a direct assault on the fundamental right to practice one's religion, unquote. Likewise, All India Muslim Personal Law Board, which many call very regressive and patriarchal, they organized this signature campaign, even after the court actually gave its verdict, where hundreds of Muslim women came to streets and they said, we support triple talaq. I mean, I don't know how to react to this, where women who suffer, they come out on the street because it's a question of Islam khatre mein hai to an extent. Islam is in danger, if we do away with a practice of this kind. And then there are many op-ed writers, these researchers like Faizur Rahman from Chennai. And then we have this very reputed Vice Chancellor of National Law University, Hyderabad, Faizan Mustafa. They said, when we can't criminalize practices of adultery, or we are trying to decriminalize adultery, we can't criminalize marital rape. How could we criminalize something like triple talaq? We should not be doing it. It's like a regressive step. It is not going to serve the purpose. However, in none of these responses of these so-called Ashraf Muslims who write op-eds, liberal upper caste Muslims who write op-eds, in none of these responses, the question of caste figure at all. All these critiques seem to be invested in maintaining the community boundary based on the image of a cohesive and egalitarian Muslim brotherhood, in which talking of triple talaq is sort of disrupting the notion of brotherhood, unity within the community. How does then caste figure in the issue of triple talaq? This is where we need to broaden and deepen the analytic of caste. That is my contention, if it has to have any analytical purchase to understand the issue of triple talaq. In his now legendary undelivered lecture, Annihilation of Caste, I'm drawing a little bit from that, Dr. Ambedkar himself proposes such a way, and I quote him when he says, There was a social problem between Ulster and Southern Ireland, the problem between Catholics and Protestants, which is essentially a problem of caste, he said, unquote. So even a religious problem of that kind, he's taking as a question of caste. What Ambedkar means a social schism, be it on the basis of religion or caste, could be considered as one of caste. What does caste then mean in this case? Deducing from Ambedkar's lecture, we could propose that the problem of caste is essentially one of deprivation and oppression also, if we have to broaden the scope. Caste is not just about birth then, it's also about deprivation and oppression. If we apply this understanding of caste to the Muslim problem, especially problem of triple talaq to these women, then there are twofold caste issues for us at hand here. Number one, when the state intervenes in matters of personal law with the purpose of reforming the community, that is, the state wants to reform Muslim community, BJP wants to reform because it feels it's backward, it has these certain regressive practices, it often draws a comparison with Hindu reform movements, such as the ones like child remarriage, widow remarriage, prohibition of sati, etc. While many left liberals and Muslims see this as a Hindu state's attempt to rescue Muslim women from oppressive Muslim patriarchy, thereby setting it up as a Hindu-Muslim issue, which partly it is. This, however, makes us forget that Hindu reform was essentially an upper caste project. When the state intervenes, it tries to reinscribe upper caste bourgeois values on the Muslim community. One way of looking at it. So what happens then? More than an attempt to rescue Muslim women, it becomes a project of exposing Muslim backwardness vis-a-vis Hindu upper caste liberalism. That's one way I'm trying to understand the question of caste in this. When the state imposes itself, it makes it a question of caste because it's showing that Hindu upper caste is liberal, which has gone through this process of reformation for so long. Muslims have failed to do it, basically. That's because we are the upper caste and you are not. You are the other of us. That is from the state's perspective. But second, when All India Muslim Personal Law Board rejects a Supreme Court judgment and hits the road with a huge signature campaign to preserve and rally to defy the order banning triple talaq by calling it a Muslim's internal issue, it merely reiterates elite Ashraf supremacy of the community in terms of leadership. Who are the leaders of this when they come out in the street? Waisi and others like this, they're all upper caste, right? I mean, elite Muslims, Ashraf Muslims. Muslim women cutting across caste agree to submit to Ashraf patriarchy in the name of community honor. Basically, that's how it is. So it's also a question of caste then. An upper caste elite who are actually imposing their views on these Muslim women and imposing that patriarchy. For me, the effort of All India Muslim Personal Law Board to preserve triple talaq is also problematic of caste, the domination of upper caste within the community leadership, which tries to impose its notion of piety and propriety on a segment of Muslim population. The conflict within the community is one between upper caste Ashraf interest, which follows a high culture in which upholding the sanctity of patriarchy becomes then a problem of caste in the form of oppression of women who are given arbitrary talaq. As Ambedkar himself wrote in his book, Partition or Pakistan, especially in the chapter, Why There Is No Organized Movement of Social Reform Among Indian Muslims, he says the problem of reform within the Muslim community, especially in regard to the position of the women vis-a-vis talaq, is because of the external pressure from the upper caste Hindus, which forces Muslims to uphold all sorts of regressive practices. That's because they feel threatened, because upper caste, when the state as an upper caste agent intervenes, that's Ambedkar was so right at that time when he wrote, in 48 or something. He's so right that then Muslims kind of try to uphold this unified sort of homogeneous, cohesive kind of unity because of threat, external threat. That's why reform becomes almost impossible within the community. That is what Arundhati Roy, in her controversial introduction to Annihilation of Caste, called that there is always a quotient of Brahmanism in all, actually, among all castes. Quotient of Brahmanism, regardless which caste they belong to, which we can say actually here that it's also a question of whichever religion they belong to. There's a quotient of Brahmanism. So in a sense, then this imposition of, this pressure to maintain the practice of triple talaq continuously, I am trying to argue here is also a question of caste, Because on the one hand, the state imposes as an upper caste entity into the lives of Muslims and tries to make it a contest between how liberal the upper castes are and how illiberal the Muslims are, in a sense, and how Muslims themselves, when they try to uphold the practice of triple talaq through their Ashraf leadership, what they do is they're trying to maintain a kind of Ashraf patriarchy through which on women's bodies they're recreating notions of propriety, piety, and things like that. So I know it's a little convoluted, but if we apply Dr. Ambedkar's way of understanding caste as also one of oppression, then I think we could see that within the community there is an issue of caste. Triple talaq is also an issue of caste if we understand it as one of oppression. It's a little far-fetched, but I thought this is one way of conceptually understanding it. I think I'm done. I'll conclude. To conclude, I'll come back to the question of spectre. Why do I call it spectre and not concrete reality of caste among Muslims? I just say the spectre of caste among Muslims. It's because caste, theoretically or theologically, whichever way you speak at it. I'm not a theological person. I'm not a theologian, so I can't speak on that. But whichever way you look at it, caste actually cannot exist in Islam, because Islam is supposed to be an egalitarian religion, which the only merit in Islam one should have is piety. How pietious you are, how sincere you are, taqwa in your faith, basically. That's all that matters. It could be from any ethnicity, any religion, any color, any gender, from anywhere, geographical area. And yet, caste haunts Indian Muslim life in its everyday manifestation, and it leaves a trace. We must be attentive to these traces to read caste in situations which apparently are rendered transparent in our liberal understanding of these issues, coded as one of Hindu-Muslim issue. Because the liberal understanding often renders the question of caste transparent. There's nothing like caste. It's all a Hindu-Muslim issue, basically. But that is why I'm saying we have to be attentive. We have to know how to read caste into these situations, basically, inscribing caste. So in this lecture, what I have tried to do, basically, my attempt has been to illustrate how beef lynching and triple talaq are essentially problems of caste, one of oppression, and how we must be attentive enough to render the transparent liberal or conservative discourses of Hindu-Muslim conflict as one of caste opacity. From liberal transparency to caste opacity is something that we should be aspiring for. It's granular, it's hazy. It's not the way the liberal and conservatives would like us to believe, a clear-cut case of question of Hindu and Muslim conflict. It's much more granular, much more hazy, much more opaque than what liberalism would have us believe. Thank you very much. I don't know if I made sense, but as I said, I wanted to work very conceptually on this without drawing on statistics or so much. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. This was a very enlightening, illuminating, and a lecture of a sort that actually has entered a domain which one rarely goes or visits. And this kind of experimentation is very much appreciated. What we saw here is how the contemporary issues that are presented within the diagonal issues of communalism and nationalism are actually having the essence of caste primarily playing an important role into it, without which or without whose acknowledgement we were not really able to reach to the in-depth of analysis. And therefore, Dilip Menon, he wrote a chapter, Why Communalism is About Caste. And in that, he traces back to the historical origins and roots, way back from the formation of Aligarh Muslim University onwards, as to how elite Muslims sort of, conducted their own experiments of, their own democratic or, religious ethos, to just efface caste from the discourses. As you have covered in this talk, that when you said your brief history of the issue of triple talaq, going from the court cases, which has mostly been a civil issue contested in the courts, has really brought my attention to the overarching presence of state as an institution to meditate,
Right.
whether it is court, whether it is parliament, or whether it is the public sphere. The state is actually playing an important role. And so some of us might also think, what about the non-state actors, or the state who is not recognizing as participants of a state?
Right.
What about their locations? And also, to give a very obvious or a very crude example of about Bangladeshi refugees, for example, coming into India, who are still non-state actors, and what happens within their, so those are the kind of, and that could also be seen within the inner parts of India, not necessarily refugees, but the denizens, who are the citizens but who have not granted the state rights. Many Dalits, many Muslims, many oppressed communities, they don't carry the voting ID, and the state benefits. So these are the kind of discourses where you also gave us about Ishrat Jahan case, which we very famously know. One of the things you commented, that BJP has nothing to lose if they engage or they implement uniform, or rather meddle with the Uniform Civil Code, because that's Muslim is not their constituency primarily, whereas Congress presenting itself as a non-sectarian kind of group was having a threat, and so we have a situation where we are facing a wall. And your data-based framework of lynchings are actually caste issues. They just get harmonized within the discourse of communal religious issues, where the spokespersons of both the communities, Hindus and Muslims, coming from the same strata of elite quarters, beginning from the colonial modernity, form views to uphold their own virtues. And I think this is a very important point that we ought to pay attention to, because dominant caste Muslims continue to enjoy the privilege without any tensions, and the oppressed Muslims who live alongside Dalits in every major cities, in the ghettos, are predominantly continue to suffer. And as we see the communal violence that takes place, rendered by the Muslim leadership or the Hindu leadership, is actually to create a war amongst the subaltern class Dalits, as well as backward class Hindus and Muslims. And therefore, when we see the issues of Godhra or any communal violence, you can see the Dalits and tribals attacking, or kind of being the vehicles of the right-wing dominant ideology to impose. And so this is the kind of religious mentioning of issues actually is not going to the root cause of the caste factor. That is playing an important role, because we don't see Shah Rukh Khan coming on the street and doing this, whereas they can do this one by having a Twitter poster to show that the harmony is maintained. And then you took us to the Barani. I was very interested, the 14th century scholar who had actually made those distinctions of Ashraf and Ajlaf, and so this kind of Ashraf being the foreign,
extract.
This is actually going to bring, if we could focus more on that, that could actually bring more of kind of revisiting the kind of uniform Muslim identity. Currently, I know of the divisions on maybe the South Indian Muslims and the North Indian Muslims, or the Deccan Muslims where I come from, but the kind of foreign-born and blood Muslims, which we know, and especially when I come from the Sultanate or the regions of formerly Nizam's control, we had what we call the Farsis, as well as the people who claim their roots to Turkish and other areas, and their last names, they maintain that because of the endogamous kind of practices, they still continue to have that, harboring the sentiments of them not really being the lower class Muslims, but we are this and this Khan or whatever, or Ansaris. And then you very beautifully concluded, which I think needs further a probe, as to how triple talaq is actually an issue of caste. It's not only imposition of the elite caste leadership of Muslims and Hindus upon the subaltern, and in this case Muslim women too, on their diktats, but also caste is not necessarily an order that is emanating from religion only. Caste, as it was observed in American South more prominently, was actually a system of gradation, where the former Negroes were identified as the caste subjects.
Right.
And therefore, when we see the reference of caste in the works of Du Bois and the contemporary scholars, up to we have Michelle Alexander writing about racial caste, and as well as Isabel Wilkerson taking about the issue of race system is being caste, because caste system doesn't allow you flexibility in the sense that the rigidity and the contempt as you go downwards. And in this case, we can see the contempt is going downwards and reverence is going upwards, as Ambedkar has famously pointed out. With this sort of vignettes that Dr. Khan has offered, I open up for more questions, comments, and you can direct to the speaker.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
you said that the casteism in Muslim is not, I mean, didn't come from the Hinduism. It is
Right,
in the
right,
Muslim.
right.
So that is the concept I don't understand. I mean,
Okay.
I thought that it is because when the Muslim invaded India,
Yeah.
whatever 700, 800 years or 1,000 years back, they converted all the Hindus to the Muslim.
Right.
And I believe that caste system, what was prevalent at that time, that inherited into the Muslim religion also. Is it not correct? Or how the Muslim has their own caste system?
You're very right. Actually, that's how we tend to understand. Even Muslims themselves tend to say that because Islam was brought to a country where there were Hindus who were already divided, so it must have actually been an accretion from the religion. It's a case of incomplete Islamization to an extent. Many tend to say that these people didn't become Muslim enough. They still carried, vestiges of Hinduism in them. That's why caste practice is still very much prevalent. But some of the recent researchers, at least some of the commentators, writers now writing, they have actually have proven that this is not the case. Like I'm talking about Masood Falahi's book. He wrote Zaat, Hindustan mein Zaat, Paat aur Musalman, caste and Muslims in India, the problem of caste and Muslims in India. Khalid Anis Ansari, who must have spoken here, I'm sure he spoke. He's another one who speaks about this issue. And all of them say that if you look at these medieval writers like Barani, whom I referred to actually, these medieval scholars, they were actually justifying the presence of this kind of division, caste division among Muslims by drawing from the Quran itself, by extrapolating from the Quran. Later on, those have been challenged recently by other scholars, but they were justifying by saying that foreign-born Muslims, like the Turkish, Persians, Afghans, and others, were actually the chosen one by God, by Allah. Whereas the Indian converts, the lower caste Indian converts, were not pure blood. So there has to be division. The good, respectable work cannot be given to these Muslims. Education should not be given to these Muslims, because the moment they have some education, they'll start revolting against these foreign-born Muslims, extract Muslims. So here by caste, we don't mean in the typical sense in the way we understand in Hindu religion. By caste, we here mean a kind of gradation, hierarchy. And that hierarchy pretty much existed among Muslims. It actually was not an accretion from Hindu religion. It was there and being justified by certain historians, theologians in medieval times. That is what the recent research is showing by Muslim writers who work on caste. So it's not just a foreign, sort of Hindu imposition on Islam or something borrowed from Hinduism, which might have been the case to an extent, of course. But it's also a case that it's ingrained. It was ingrained in foreign-born Muslims, foreign extract Muslims. Those who took like someone like Barani, he was happy that Saids are supposed to be the top Muslims, right? In Islam, it happens like Said, Sheikh, Mughal, Pathan. That's the way it's among the Ashraf. These are the four divisions. And he was openly writing that Saids are the best Muslims because they come from the Prophet's family. They're in close proximity with the Prophet. So they're the most purebred, basically. So the scholars now are saying that it was actually not the case that it came from Hinduism. I mean, the question of caste wasn't just a question of accretion. It was very much there within Islam, and it was theologians and writers and philosophers, they justified caste too, this kind of gradation and hierarchy within community. Yeah.
So this degradation exists in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, or only in the India?
That's an interesting question. So many again say that when they came to India, they must have been influenced by Indian caste system. But many are saying no, it was very much there in Persia. This kind of hierarchy existed. Even in Arab world, that the Prophet's tribe, the Quraysh tribe, they're supposed to be the topmost. Even there it's mentioned, it was talked about it, at least in Hadith and other places, that others are Muslims, but still the first four rulers were all, the rulers could be from the Quraysh tribe, basically. That was the whole idea. So some amount of gradation existed, even in those countries, hierarchy existed. And my own understanding, I might be wrong, is I have found in my small little interaction among Kerala Muslims and Northern Indian Muslims, I have found Kerala Muslims to be much more egalitarian than North Indian Muslims. I have found in my own little interaction. I don't know why is that. I have found maybe that's because of Arab influence among Kerala Muslims. That's where it came from. Whereas Persian influence in North Indian Muslims have produced more hierarchies. That clearly shows that Persia or the influence from those countries much more hierarchical and conscious about these divisions among themselves. I don't see that kind of division among South Indian, especially Malayali Muslims. It's much less. So Arab Muslim could be a little more egalitarian than Persian Islam, actually. That's my own understanding. I could be totally wrong.
There's also within the Kerala, because of its location on the peninsula, there's also this Arabic Islamic kind of,
right.
But also African Islam kind of,
influence.
Because of this whole trade. K.N. Chaudhary wrote a very huge magnum opus, and the Indian Ocean literature kind of talks about it, about how because when the African kings who converted to Islam, mostly within the Horn of Africa and inwards, I mean, they were also connected to that part. So I think that could be the one thing. And about in Middle East, I know one student who is an LLM student from Yemen, Safa. She actually just wrote a thesis, her LLM thesis, comparing the Hashimi, what she called Hashimi supremacy. Hashimi are the dominant caste, that's what she says, of Yemen, who trace their affinity to Prophet Muhammad as the closest, and so they tend to enjoy the privileged position power, whereas the lower caste. And so she compared Hashimi supremacy, Brahmin supremacy, and white supremacy in her paper, and she kind of traced the laws of Manu and then the Qurans and as well as Hadiths kind of references and going back to the American experiences. So I think those kind of people are finding it appealing within their own religion, with their own country context, where they are actually this is a super. And she kind of makes a case that nobody in her country ever talked about the issues of supremacy in the caste gradation. And I think this is one of the ways we, it has been opening up more questions.
If nobody has them, I will just ask about this.
Yeah, sure.
So this triple talaq. So is this triple talaq is more prevalent in the lower caste Muslims, or it is? So how it is more a caste issue, triple talaq, than in general a interference by the state authority on any religion?
As I said, I was speaking more conceptually when it came to the question of triple talaq as a question of caste, because there have been no statistics, no studied, collated data that, okay, these women who are given triple talaq, these many are upper caste or ashraf, or these many ansaris or whatever. So we don't have any such statistics. But going by the overall statistics, if among Indian Muslims only say 10%, 15% are, so-called ashraf, the rest are all converted Muslims or even backward Muslims, Dalit Muslims. So obviously the case would be that most of those who are getting divorced are also would be, lower caste to some extent. But that's not how I was trying to argue. How I was trying to argue it's a question of caste is, I was trying to draw from Dr. Ambedkar's notion that caste is also a question of oppression, one of hierarchy, gradation, humiliation, subjection. And triple talaq is actually all those things. Within the community, if you say in hierarchy, then it's Ashraf leadership which is trying to impose its patriarchy on Muslim women. So when it oppresses a particular group within the community, it becomes a question of caste for me, following Dr. Ambedkar. That's how I was trying to look at it, as a question of caste. And when the state imposes itself on the community to say that we are going to save Muslim women, what it's doing, it's bringing a particular notion of reform with it, which is upper caste notion of reform already among Hindus, like child remarriage. Because very often you will see how many of the commentators write that if Hindus could have these reforms 100 years back, why can't Muslims have these reforms at this moment? So basically, it's an imposition of a particular notion of reform, which is upper caste in its orientation. And when the state intervenes, it intervenes as an upper caste entity into the lives of Muslim women. So that is one way of understanding how it's a caste issue. That it's an upper caste imposition on women who are not yet upper caste yet, in that sense, backward, who need saving. And the second, how within the community, Muslim leadership, when it imposes or it wants this practice to continue despite the court order, it simply is oppressing these women. So it becomes then a question of caste. So that's how I was extrapolating. So it's very conceptual, the way I'm trying to look at it, because there's no statistics. And I didn't even want to go that way. That would be a more simplistic way of understanding this. I'm trying to expand and deepen the analytic of caste as such by saying caste is not just a question of birth, which it is. I don't want to fall into the trap of Arundhati Roy when I say that, that any kind of Brahminism between two hierarchical groups is a question of caste. And which can then mean that birth has nothing to do with it. In the Indian context, it's dangerous to claim that. When everything is determined by your birth, especially among Hindus, the way caste is actually hierarchized. But still, I would like to say that there is an element of Brahminism in everyone. So whoever can oppress, whoever is below in the hierarchy would always oppress. That's how also we should try to understand caste. So then Muslim women would be the lower caste. Muslim men are like the upper caste, basically. So it's a very convoluted way, but very conceptually I'm trying to understand this whole question of caste. And then maybe possibly if we understand caste that way, that if that is our analytical approach, then possibly we can extend it to many other events and questions.
If this kind of theory is well taken and well put forward, which is already being done by Khaled and other scholars contemporary times, then it could also disrupt or it could create more dialogues among the diasporic Indian Muslim community that is also extendedly, present, as a form of whatever, mercantile. Their origins, like I'm thinking here in Africa, many Indian Muslims are there.
Especially South Africa and places
like
those.
Yes. South Asian Muslims, I would say. Also in America, and so I was thinking just out loud, if those kind of, that comes up, maybe those, the impact could be also across the world, where, Muslim community is actually, and then the question of caste could be coming. Anyone?
Oh, sorry.
I have one question. So you said that when the 5 examples that you gave, right, 5 people person, when the government intervened for the triple talaq rule, they said that it's their personal choice, that the Muslim person. So that choice is for Muslim women also. And the second question is, what happens to when they have their personal rules? What happens to the children's custody?
Yeah, I mean that provision is also there in the law, because I think there's a huge vague area there. When the Supreme Court declares it's invalid, but it doesn't say anything else.
Yeah, that's true.
So I, as a Muslim in India, I was among the very few who were all along. We have been asking for some kind of punitive measure, because otherwise, what's the point in calling something invalid? Because right after the judgment came out, within 5 days, there were cases of triple talaq, couple of them. where men again sent SMS and said triple talaq. Because they know there is no punishment for it. Right? But at the same time, I also understand the anxiety of many liberals in India, left liberals, and Muslims also, that the moment you criminalize it by introducing, say, 3 years of jail term, immediately it could become a provision for jailing more Muslim men, because they're saying here, even the woman who is a victim wouldn't have to go to the court to seek justice or police station. Anyone can file a complaint that this man has given triple talaq.
Okay.
So anyone can go and file a complaint and this man would be taken into custody. So that is the dangerous part of it. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. What between court's verdict, which is vague, and this government's intervention, which is pretty muscular to an extent, too muscular, in fact, for comfort for many, that it should be a little less muscular, that, okay, fine, you can arrest, but it should be bailable. But they came up with a law that, which they framed, that it's non-bailable. So that is criminal offense, right?
Yeah.
In marital cases, we never have a non-bailable case ever, except for domestic violence. Yes.
Yeah.
Strict triple talaq, you get non-bailable offense.
That is the law the government is trying to pass, and that has created a lot of jitters among people, among Muslims and different groups, and even you can say left liberal groups.
So when you say that anybody can say that he has given the triple talaq, even she is not his wife, still she can claim that he has given me the triple talaq, or she has to be?
No, in this, what I meant by that is, suppose we are fighting and we are having issues, so someone else can just go to the police station and say complain against me,
okay,
or complain against him.
That he has given the triple talaq.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the wife who has to go, actually, which is dangerous in a way.
No, before this government rule, whenever I believe this triple talaq practice is being since ages, right?
Yeah.
Before this government intervention to make a law and all that, you said that it was their own practice.
That's within the community.
They, like, have all the verbal, only the rules were like verbal, like what happens today by the law, like if you look at the other communities, if you get a divorce, you have to get a divorce like by law, then they follow some process, custody, the maintenance that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
So before the government intervened, was there any rule by the community, if you get a triple talaq, this is what will happen? Like you said, 90 days, they are supposed to be what happens to the custody of kids?
Yeah, this is the issue. Some of the women couldn't even get their kids. They were taken away. So there is no rule absolutely.
Okay.
See, there is always this provision that one could approach a civil court. It did not mean that one would only go to the community to look for justice, seek justice. So it will be treated like any of the other civil cases. Okay. Based on personal law, it does not mean that there are community courts. There is no Sharia court in India. It's not that there are Sharia courts which are actually dealing with these personal cases. The court is the court, the standard court. But there are two bifurcations, one dealing with personal law, another one dealing with criminal law. So one would go to these courts and seek justice there for custody, the way a Hindu woman would do it or a Christian woman would do it. But along with that, there has been a persistent demand to codify Muslim personal law, which is not codified. So often it's interpreted depending on what is there in Quran, what is there in in schools of jurisprudence, what is there in Sunnah, what did Prophet do at that particular moment in time. This is often the reference point. What did Prophet say in a particular situation when someone came up with a problem of that kind? What many Muslim organizations are demanding now, women's organizations, that let there be codification of Muslim law, so that we have one particular practice, we know it. Okay, if this happens, custody will go to this person. Hindu personal law was codified by Nehru, and that was another bone of contention, that whereas Hindu personal law was codified during Nehru's time, Muslim personal law was not codified. Many see it as an appeasement. Things are totally kept vague, basically. You could just, it becomes a sort of case-by-case basis. The only precedence you have is what has happened maybe in a case in 1980. Court will go back to that. Even in this case, they did it in triple talaq case. Because they read some of the cases that happened in Kerala and other places where they said it was invalid, declared at that time. So it stands even now. The way court functions, they always go back to 50 years of cases and they look up and they try to find it.
Last question.
Sure. We can get two more if people are interested.
Yeah, sure.
So I used to live in the area where there is a lot of Muslim community out there, but I never knew, and in fact, till 1 year back or 2 years back, that there is a casteism within the Muslim community. So now when Suraj was telling about in the Godra Kand or any communal riots whenever happen between the Hindu and Muslim, it is always the lower caste within both the community which fight with each other, get killed, that's all. That is how it happens. So, and that may be happening because even these people may not be knowing that, for example, Hindu people, Hindu Dalit, they don't know that the people with whom they are fighting or they are killing, they are from the same Dalit community, even if they are from the Muslim, but they are still their brothers and all this. So does it make any sense that the people, means the Dalit people or lower caste people within the Muslim community should declare themselves that, hey, within Muslim, we are the Dalits and all, and try to form a bondage across the lower caste or the means Dalit everywhere, irrespective of whether it is a Christian or anybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting observation because it has been a bone of contention for quite some time. Because whenever there has been a talk of Dalit Muslim solidarity, often Dalit Muslims have said, that's a wrong idea. It should be Dalit Muslim and Dalit Hindu solidarity, basically. That both are at the receiving end of state violence or violence of different kinds. You know, deprivation in terms of jobs, housing, and other things. So how could we ever talk of Muslim Dalit solidarity, whereas a significant segment of Muslims are very well off, elite Muslims, basically. You know, so yes, you're absolutely right. But when it comes to political processes, like how Dalits are co-opted into the upper caste fold just for violence, it is an ongoing process of Hinduization of Dalit communities, which has been going on in places like Gujarat for too long. RSS has been actively practicing it. They have even done it with tribals in many places. So when this happened, Gujarat riot happened, tribals were a significant part of those people who were committing violence were also tribals, actually, and Dalit Hindus. So, but can we build a solidarity on the basis of these and say, don't fight, we are the same people, basically, just that you are Hindu, we are Muslim, or we are Christian? That has been the grounding of politics of people like Ejaz Ali, I mentioned, you know, the guy who was trying to bring them together. He has been saying it all along that what we need is a politics of Dalits from both Hindu, Christian, and Muslim, all these communities. That will be the day they come together. In fact, if you listen to their videos and stuff like that, all of these Muslim leaders from backward classes, the only thing they would keep on saying is the day Dalit Muslims come together, the day the backward Muslims come together with backward Hindus, that'll be the day, the end of caste supremacy in India. But it never happens. Somehow. It never happens because in the case of Muslims, there's always this fear of numbers, small numbers. The number has to be intact because if we fracture it further, then there might be more violence from outside. That's the whole idea. So the consolidation of numbers, to come back to Dilip Menon again, there is this, you have this outside violence, implosion, and then you have this explosion of violence. When when the Mandal thing happened within Hindu religion, it was fractured. It created a trauma for upper caste, basically. And right after that, you had something like 92, Babri Masjid. There was an explosion to consolidate again these lower castes within the fold as such, right? So the whole idea is, I'm not sure, I'm not very hopeful of Dalit solidarity. I'm sorry to say this, between religions, I hope there is, but it's such a difficult proposition. People are motivated by so many different interests, that they still feel, okay, if we align with certain upper caste Muslim, elite Muslims, we might get some benefits from this. And also, as I said, opportunism is another thing. Ejaz Ali to the other guy, what's his name, who wrote that, who created this backward Muslim organization. Sorry, he's also an Ansari, actually.
Iqbal Ahmad Sharif?
Iqbal Ahmad Sharif, yeah. So these guys all got tickets from the RJD or JDU in Bihar. So they were co-opted and they became sometimes MLAs, MLCs, ministers. and they abandoned the interest of these groups after that. So in India, I personally find that's why I have been very critical that of Muslim intellectuals too in India, that somehow the powers there would find a way to co-opt them. I shouldn't take names, but when Zoya Hassan, who is such a famous professor of political science in JNU, or her husband was Jamia Millia vice chancellor, but they were always very friendly to Congress party. Actually, they were intellectuals of the Congress to an extent. Likewise, you'll find intellectuals of BJP, intellectuals of RJD, and all these. So what they do, they fracture them, they co-opt them, and those who were at one stage very militant, rebels, revolutionaries, finally they sell themselves. They're opportunists. And so this is, I think, it's the right place to talk about it. If we are fighting a battle, we have to see it through till the end. We cannot get co-opted. That's the whole idea. Because tomorrow they might come and approach you, that Suraj, why don't you be part of this, part of that? Because the moment they find that someone has a significant following or someone is becoming influential, they will approach you to co-opt you, basically. That's how it works in India. In India, that's exactly how it works in India.
Well, political parties sometimes keep on writing to me, trying to have meetings.
I'm not surprised.
When I go to Delhi and all the political leadership wants to work this and that way.
Yeah.
Be it Congress, be it BJP, unsurprisingly, or the local parties. I will just finish up, maybe if you don't have questions, with an anecdote. My friend is a police sub-inspector in Mumbai police, and he is posted in an area where they had the Qatl Khana, the slaughterhouse. I think now he's transferred, but he told me this incident in 2014 when the incidents were taking place. And then he told me that in this case, a guy named Shukla from a local BJP party had actually become millionaire by extortions from the Muslim dealers of beef, as well as the local sellers. They would pay quietly their what they called hafta or whatever the weekly money, but he found out, and so he actually went against Shukla, and Shukla being a local congressman, this all fascist people who are willing to do any kind of. So he actually was humiliated him. I mean, the police sub-inspector humiliated Shukla in front of other police people, where he had commendable respect, and then he had threatened him that I will see what will you do in your life to the police sub-inspector. And then because this guy who is a police sub-inspector comes from a Hindu background and fairly kind of a background who he could easily associate with the right-wing policy because of the whole development in the Muslim thing, I was surprised to see the way he took the stand. And then he said that it was an issue of total exploitation, meaning this guy is actually, each truck or vehicle that goes from that Qatl Khana has to pay money to this guy. And there are various chains, police and everyone is involved. And when he's making money out of it, he is actually not standing for the beliefs he thought that this the Hindutva offered, meaning cow protection and so forth. It was actually, he saw there was a dark and real circle behind it. And when I saw him in his professional duty taking an actual stand, and if you're a Mumbai police, you are a very strong person, and especially if you're having a star ranks, that made me think, and that has been long inquiry, and there was some report floating around social media, and because it's on social media, I did not believe it, but it was like they were like top 3 guys of beef trade are Sharmas, some Guptas, and the Baniyas and Brahmins who are benefiting out of beef leather, and then their factories are located all across, and the labor class. Again, so this I wanted to end with kind of merging it with the neoliberal policies that are operating within this framework as to how local level violence is incited to actually zoom out, mushroom, and spread and participate into global fascism. And this is how we see global fascism is taking hold. And one of this example is beef, where people are actually exporting the violences in their own domain, benefiting out of the conservative market policies that we are having today. Dr. Mosarraf Khan, we were very honored and obliged to have you deliberate upon this issue. My notebook is full of your comments. I take it with more deliberation, and I'm sure the audience benefited equally. I would like to invite Sanjeev and Sanjay to facilitate Dr. Mosarraf Khan as a part of token of love.
Oh.
Sanjeev, come. No, come. Sanjeev, go. Cool. This is our ritual.
Oh, thank you so much.
Come, Sanjeev.
It's fine.
Thank you. Photograph.
Thank you.
And I must say that the more I read